All right, we're gonna take a minute to talk about some cards. Okay. Now, first of all, the correct version of this deck does not have Oriana and Katakan. It has Knickers. Okay. And it has Igni. I like to play a fun version because I like to be different. But this is what you're seeing now is the correct version of this deck. It's what's in my spreadsheet. It's what I recommend you play. You have Lock, you have Purify. This is for consistency because it's really important that you draw these two cards. And it's also really important that you win round one, so that's why these two cards are in the deck. This is your Tall Punish. You're going to need Tall Punish against some decks that are greedier than yours. Because Toad Prince only is good in... Toad Prince has zero synergy with the rest of the deck. It's just a card. It's a conditional 11 for 8. And it really only is valuable when you're against a spotter. But it also removes a target. So if they open with spotter, are you going to Toad Prince it? Well, what are you going to bleed? It's not good. Toad Prince is copium and is usually used by people who aren't like specialists in vamp, like haven't played this up enough or don't know enough about the deck to be someone you want to follow. If you look at like Poison, you will never find a Toad Prince in his vampire deck. Thanks, Artelon. Let me do that real quick before I forget. Mods, could you please put this in as a tier 1 deck? Thanks. Okay. So that's why this is the best. Like if the Toad Prince is also good against Reaver decks, kind of. I mean, you're eating it too, but you know, it gets value there. But against Reavers, you also want all the tempo you can get. And like, it's not like you have Decree in this, right? Oh, it's good in the mirror? No, it's not. It's not. Because Necrorat does a Drowner does the same thing. Like if you're disabling, like I've never lost a Vamp Mirror war. We both drew the same amount of cards, right? Like where they had Toad Friends, nah. Because this deals with the Necrorat. So, like, and again, Toad Prince comes at the cost of Knickers. So you're less likely to draw your key cards. Who cares if you got a Toad Prince if you don't draw your Reach to Renfrey? Two Incubus is really good. You could argue you can reduce one of them down to 1. Like, I can see getting rid of 1 Incubus and upgrading Knickers to an Oriana because Oriana, like, there's certain matchups where she just guarantees you round 1. Sorry, I can't listen to Big Pun while talking. It's too much. Okay, let's play something chill so I can talk. Yeah. There's a question: is Renfrey just for? Sorry, is Rune Mage just for Renfrey? That question misunderstands the purpose of Rune Mage. Rune Mage isn't a card that you play for carryover or you play in round 1 or blah blah blah. Rune Mage is just a really flexible card, and if you know the options that you're gonna get, this will win you games. Yeah. Because in the first couple of days of the season, Genius, this was bricking a lot against Skellige, but I'm not seeing a lot of Skellige recently, so I'm switching it back to Igni. But you can switch them back and forth. It doesn't. The point of this is to have a Tall Punish. Pick the Tall Punish that works best for you in the current. Okay, what was I talking about? Before I got distracted. Rune Mage. This is, first of all, especially with Roach, it's a lot of tempo, right? It's 12 points of tempo in one turn, usually. Minimum. It can give you a Flutter, Necrat, Alp, Garcane, Bruxa, right? Or, like just look at all the bronzes that you want, right? From monsters. So, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 that have direct and automatic synergy in the deck. 9 if you count Drowner, right? So there's, first of all, there's 9 bronzes that are just like cards you could easily put in the deck, and they would fit. Then there's cards like Endrega Larva or Necker, or whatever. They're just really good in a lot of matchups, right? There's things like this that do 4 damage, but there's also 2 Purifies. This is Nagelfar's Taskmaster, and where is it? The 4P Bleed Special. That's another Purify, right? So you have 2 Purifies, you have 2 movements, so Drowner and Bruiser. And like back then against Assimilate, I would often like, there's a lot of consumes too, right? So consumes were good against Sigil back then. You can use consumes if you're against like Assimilate to consume your own Rune Mage so they can't copy it. And so the same turn that it comes down, you can consume it or Cyclops it and it goes away. You get 5 of these options, right? And like this is just an engine they have to answer, right? Now, if you go to like different factions, there's different things. If you really need to move something offensively, Scoia'tael has like 3 options instead of the 2 that monsters gives you. But then the Nilfgaard option is really useful because there's 2 locks, and there's Joust, and there's Assassination. So there's like 4 different answers that you have to somebody playing an engine that you want to get rid of. Not counting things like Kingslayer and the Spotter and Sergeant. So Nilfgaard's a really good option usually. NR has like the most boost and proactive ones, but I almost never take NR in this deck. Yeah, Coda Weapon, sorry. So 5 choices. Coda Weapon does 5 damage and clogs, right? Nilfgaard also has bleed givers. So they have like the clog one, the one that does 2 bleed. They've got Pikemen, and then even their Van Morlehems can do a bleed. They have Thirsty Dames, which boost every time you apply a bleed. Nilfgaard just has a lot of cool things that work with vamps as well. In the mirror, I usually go for monsters, you know, unless they like put down an Unseen Elder or something that or a Catachan that I just need to answer. Because a lot of the Nilfgaard cards, like if I go for an Alba Armored Cavalry, then they can Incubus it out later and give themselves a Necrat in the mirror. Right? So in the mirror, you have to really think about Incubus. And sometimes that decides the game. But anyway, Rune Mage is not just like for Renfrey. It is a kind of like, yo, I have a problem, I need a solution. That problem can be tempo, that problem can be I need to answer something from the opponent, or I don't have a way to apply a bleed right now and my Regis isn't growing. Please give me a bleed giver. Yes, it's exactly. It's a Swiss knife, which is something you need when you're playing a deck that doesn't have like when you're Oneiromancy and Spore and you know whatever, right? Of course, if you have it, you want to play before Renfrey. But if you don't have it and you need to play Renfrey, that's fine. So let's talk about Renfrey's options now, right? Let's first go through the the curses, and I'll say like kind of roughly when I have used that in the past with this vampires deck. This is different for every deck. Some of these apply to other decks, some of them don't. But just like the lesson I take from this is that there's like these different options. They're good in different situations. Here are some examples of when you would use them. Think about them. Play the deck. Play the game. And every time, like think about these options before the turn where you're playing a Renfrey. So Curse of Lust. Spawn a base copy of an enemy unit on the opposite row. Right? This is really only good in a few situations. One, it's like round 3, you've Renfried, and they have like an Oak or an Arniolf or, Jutta or something big, and it's a point slammy kind of. You just click it and you get like 12 or 13 points that isn't going on top of your Regis, right? Like, yeah, because it spawns a unit rather than boosting a unit, right? My Arena indeed. It's also good if you're against like a vampires deck or something and they have an Oriana and you don't, or you do, but you want a second one, or they have an Unseen Elder, or just something you want to copy that has synergy with your deck. Sometimes, like with a Philippe, it's useful because vampires, you apply statuses to stuff, right? So if something is bleeding, Philippe can lock it. And then it's something they have to lock. So you can like, I've used this on their Philippe to lock their Philippe and like win the game because of it. But most of the time, this is not the one you take. Curse of Gluttony. This is your like kind of the reason why this deck is played. Because on a Regis, this can be like 17 points. Right? Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but it's like that many. Now, if your opponent has last say and a tall punish, don't take this. Like, or at least, or if you've somehow taken it in the previous round where you thought for sure you were going to have last say, but then it turned out you were wrong, and now you're stuck with it, use it on something else. Use it on an Incubus. Plays for 8. It's fine. Better than 0 if you played it on Regis that gets removed anyway. Right? In fact, there's been times where, because I don't have last say, I've like mulliganed my Regis and like kept an Igni instead as my last card. So that's Gluttony. It's pretty straightforward. Curse of Greed. This is like the most points after Gluttony usually. It spawns a stratagem, so it's like minimum of 9 points. But it's also extra useful because the neutral one, if you're not going for the points, you can get a Curse Scroll to fix your hand. It's like a last-ditch effort to like get your Regis if you don't have it. You can get the sword that does 3 damage and 2 bleed, which is kind of useful if you don't have any bleeds and you have an Oriana on the board or something. Or like a Flutter and Garcane, and that bleeding is going to tick and boost your Regis also. Like that's way more than 5 points. Ceremonial Dagger, thank you. It's also useful for a second Crystal Skull on your range row. So when you're against poison decks, Crystal Skull like wins games. And sometimes against vampires. It can also protect you from locks, right? So if you have like an Unseen Elder against Nilfgaard and you know they can't remove a 6, you play this and then, right? And I'm mentioning cards that aren't in the deck because there are variations you can play if you like or whatever. But the point is that like you use this on an engine to keep it from getting locked, or use it on a tall unit to keep it from getting poisoned. Or against Skellige, you can use it on an Ekrat to keep it alive. Just use a TA, right? Get it out of reach of like their Gutting Slash or whatever. Now, Curse of Sloth is one of the most powerful ones. It's the one you see Nilfgaard frequently use, but it's also good in Vamps because you have a lot of combo cards. So like you can play a Flutter and then use this order to play Incubus and get a Nekurat and click the Nekurat, and now your Flutter goes to 6 on the turn that you played it, right? Sometimes that's important. Against decks that cannot remove a 6, but they could remove a 4. Like, say, Symbiosis. It's also good as a way to draw your Regis, right? Just make sure that you have a bronze when you select this, and make sure that you don't play your last bronze before you've clicked it. I've done that many times where I've bricked my leader. Because if you can't use the order, you also don't get the passive if the passive requires you clicking the order on your leader. Yeah, this is very strong. It's basically lets you play 2 cards in 1 turn, and one of those cards can be a card that you draw from your deck. So it's like one of the strongest. Yeah, with Emir. Nice. And then Curse of Envy. This used to be like the most broken thing back when it was like 2 to all boosted and damaged units or whatever. Now it's just situational. If you're in a very long round and your opponent, just count how many units they have. That's how many points this is. Easy to compare. Wrath. This is one that you will use a lot with this deck because you have no other source of like immediate damage. If there's a unit like a Damien that you need to remove, and you don't, or you know, lock, and you don't have your lock, or you've already used your lock, this is your answer. Against decks like Reavers, that can have 3 Reavers next to each other with 1 power and 2 armor, this can remove all 3. And if they're the live ones, then they can't make new Reavers. Like, this is very strong in those situations. In terms of points, the ceiling on this is 13 because it deals excess damage to adjacent units. So if there's a 1 power unit and 2 units with at least 5 next to it, or with at least, sorry, it's not 13 anymore. It's 11. If there's a 5, a 1, and a 5, you can use this on the 1 and you know, kill all 3, or at least damage the other 2 by 5 each. So again, just count the points, right? For the ones that are just points like Gluttony versus Envy versus Wrath versus Pride, sometimes you're just using them for points, like, or Greed or whatever. You can just count the points and then pick the one that's the most points. But these give you removal, which the other ones don't. So, and then Curse of Pride, destroy an enemy with 8 power or less. This I use rarely, but sometimes if you don't get Wrath, and there's a 5 power drill on the board that you really need to kill, you just take this. You fire it. It's 2 less points, but it still gets rid of the drill, which is what you care about. All right, blessings. Well, before I move on, any questions about the curses? There's 7 of them. You see 3. Rune Mage lets you see 5. Okay. Let's talk about blessings. So at the end of your turn, this is Chastity. If your leader ability is not used, boost the lowest powered ally unit by 1. This is probably what I should have taken last game, actually, instead of Kindness. But this is something that you take if you have to Renfrey early in the game, and compared to the other options, it is more points, and you don't need any of the other options. If you're just looking at it from a pure points perspective, let's say you compare it to Temperance, which after using your leader, set the lowest power allied unit to 10. If your lowest power allied unit is a 3, then this is 7 points. That means, do I have 7 turns left? No? Okay. Also, this is only until you use your leader. So if you've taken Gluttony with your Regis, then you know you're going to not use your leader until your last turn. That's fine. But some of these other abilities you're going to use a lot earlier, and so this is very few points. So it's not usually the one you see people take. It's situational. In some situations, it's more points, and sometimes you take it for the, you know, I used to take this against Sihil because it would screw them up. And yes, don't take Temperance so I've lost games because of this. Like, let's say against Pirates, I had a bunch of units, right, or against Warriors, and I had last say with Regis or whatever, and they removed everything else, so I only had Regis on the board, and so clicking this would have lost me points because it doesn't boost; it sets the lowest power. So you can have a 30-point Regis, and this sets it to 10. Keck. Blessing of Charity. After using your leader ability, play the lowest provision unit from your deck. It's not often you use this with vamps. I'd use this a lot more with Kashi, for example. The Nilfgaard decks with Renfrey and Triss use this a lot because it puts another body on the board, and their lowest provision cards are usually things like Illusionist or Tortoise, which are a lot of points. But just look at your deck. If all your 4P cards are like Bruxa and Garcane, and you have 2 Necrats on the board, this is probably your best bet, right? Or if it's like your lowest provision is a Drowner or a Peller, and that's the thing that you need right now to deal with something your opponent's doing. Okay. Sometimes it's worth taking the 50-50. It's like you're only out. Blessing of Diligence. After using your leader, randomly split 6 damage amongst enemy units. This, usually you take if you're also taking Wrath and you're against something like Reavers, although they have armor. Or if you're playing against like, another engine deck, and there's not a lot of stuff on the board. If you're against Sir Scratch-a-Lot, you can kill something else, and then the Diligence will kill the cat, right? Just count the points. If the number of points on the board is less than X, then 6 and 6 will kill everything, etc. Kindness. This is the one you see Nilfgaard take a lot early game against like Harmony, although Harmony is not as popular now. Whenever you play a unit with odd power, boosted by 1 for each adjacent even powered unit. And then, so that means if you have 2 Garcanes that are 4 power each, and you put a Bruxa in between them, the Bruxa will get boosted to 5 when you deploy it. Now, the timing and the order of things when it comes to Thrive and boosts, and it's like if you have Fletters and you're playing a Bruxa between the Fletters, it's complicated. I'm not going to go through it all here. Just, I will tell you, you should play it and test it and learn it, because it's very important. If you take this leader, you want to maximize the points. In an ideal world, you get 2 points a card from this, right? And so oftentimes Nilfgaard would take this with Sloth, because that lets them play an extra card. And so they'll do things like play a Ramon into an Illusionist. The Illusionist will go to 6, and then use Sloth to play another bronze between the 2 even powered units, like an Alba or something. And the Alba will go to 7. And so in one turn, they got like 4 points out of it. And they can get 2 or more points per turn, because a lot of their cards play other cards. In this deck, it's a little hard because you have a lot of even powered units. 6, 6, 6, 6. You have some 6, 6, 6, 4, 6, 6, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 3, 2. Right? You only have Renfrey that's like an odd power unit. Knickers, but you're probably not gonna have Knickers on the board when you have this, because this is usually later in the game after you've used all leader charges. Now you can have Garcanes that have grown, or Fletters that are at an odd power because you use the leader on them. So it's not like you never get this, but it's just something to keep in mind, is that if you're used to playing Nilfgaard and you're like, oh, kindness, I take it. It's not necessary. It's definitely not as good here. Blessing of Patience is very rare, because for this to happen, you have to use all 3 leader charges by, what is it? You play 16 cards in a normal game. You have to use this twice. I mean, it gets tricky with like passing and mulligans and whatnot. But you want to use like this is something you do if you play Renfrey very early, because you want to get at least 2 uses out of it. Otherwise, it's just like way worse than everything else. Yeah. And then Humility, whenever you pass, boost the lowest power ally unit by 4. This is still often the one I end up taking, even in round 3. But if you get it in round 1, it can be 8 points or 12 points over the course of a game. More importantly, it gives you reach, and it can save you a card sometimes. There's 18 turns if you don't play last card in round 1 and 2. Okay. 18. Thanks. Yeah. This also kind of makes you immune to being bled, which people aren't going to bleed vampires because it would lose them their last say. Yeah. It gets tricky because like sometimes like if you play something high tempo in round 2 because you're bleeding because you need to get out of scenario or croc on crate or something. You know, you can pass, and sometimes it takes them 2 turns to get there. Like if you open with like Rune Mage into you open with like incubusing out the Renfrey's gang into your flutter, followed by a Rune Mage and another leader charge, followed by Renfrey's gang. Like that's a lot of points in 3 turns. And then your Regis is growing the whole time after you pass, and they have to play 2 cards. And after they play their last card, they have to end turn, and it comes to you, and then you auto pass, and it goes back to them. It's the same thing that determines how big your Regis is. It's how I've gotten like a 26-point Regis. What do I think about Teshamutna Sword? Well, I think it's a special, and Renfrey requires 25 units in your deck. But yeah, it can be good in a Vampires deck because bleeding is a status, right? I didn't mean to cut the deck. There we go. So like in my Golden Necker Vamp stack, I do run Teshamutna because it can do 10 or 15 damage. Or Tesham is better when the Siri Nova's flying around. Or there's a lot of defenders or whatever. But yeah, I hope that was helpful. Let's play some more. So right now I've taken the Katakan out and put in the Igni, and I did that by cutting an Alp and replacing it with a Brook. So this is a hard matchup. They kind of counter us because they have Veil, they have movement, and they have removal. Plus they have like Point Slam. It can't really be tempo abused like other decks can. And we have a Brick in our hand. It's actually good that we don't have our Regis. Sometimes they'll force you to play down to the last card. But we also don't have any Purifies, which is going to be a huge problem if they decide. Because they have Crystal Skull, and they could play Veil cards. And it's just going to be very, very annoying. So opponent like won the matchup roulette. Yeah, Tesham kills Siri. Because it does 5 damage 3 times to Siri. First one hits the shield, and then the other 2. Yeah, as expected. So here I'm going to go for Rune Mage, monsters, and hope to get a Purify. These are all real bad. I'm not going to be playing much on the range row. So if he ends up, because Roach went range row, I took this because he'll end up like Art Gathing. And, you know, then he has to deal with the possibility of this dying. If he wants to. You know. It's not much, but that's all we got. So he's played 2 Veiled units. We drew no, even though we have a Peller and a Queen of the Night, we drew neither. And that's probably game already, honestly. Like, I could just forfeit and go next. Any good now? Yeah, DJ, I assumed that once Renfrey got nerfed, people would be playing a lot of decks like this, or decks that can go uninteractive and deny you Regis value. But people didn't. People still play Renfrey, people still play unit heavy decks. I don't know. Ended up being good. Turns out I was wrong about that. So that was a fun round one, I thought. I mean, he thinks he's being cool, but he just wasted both his boglets. I played the Necrorat so that I have something to incubus with this. If he passes here. That will give me 2 points on Regis. Yeah, I mean, screw him. Anytime people like over counter your Regis, it's usually a good thing for you. We played a lot of good stuff too, but we still don't have our Renfrey and Regis.
Naivety is a fool's blessing.
You shall never know peace again.
He just wanted to thin. So he has 9 points and we have 0. Actually, he has 8 points. So we just use a leader charge and do this. He loses 2. Yeah, we're fine. Yeah, you're right, Jesus. I realized that after I said it. Definitely don't want this. Don't want you either. So no Renfrey, no Igni. We only drew our maxi round 3. What could you do?
Garments are shackles that restrain our
We have
desires.
2 Necrats in the graveyard. Well, we didn't draw our second Incubus, so we're just gonna have to win this one with Cunning and Guile. Without a tall punish, this is basically impossible.
Your souls will propel this long ship.
Is he really not gonna move the Necrorat? That's so greedy. Whatever. I won't argue. I mean, that Death Wish unit made him not play his Winter Queen round 1. Trying to set up a death off pocket.
Your deepest, darkest dreams, I can make them real.
Oh, we drew our Regis. But yeah, him not having used his last movement. I mean, he'll probably do it here if I have to. Guess. Now, do I use my last? I don't think I do.
You need people like me.
Thanks for following me out. Appreciate it. Here's a derp. He's Omega Floof. So he moved it. Didn't use a leader. We just use this now. We bleed the thing in the back that has armor. I don't want to bleed this because then Blood Moon will do 1 damage to it. That's really bad. Just Hopium and Pragium. He'll try and, like, he'll probably Imler's Wrath the Flutter now. Or boost his unit some other way. So I keep boosted that guy in the back. So now I can't hit him. I think I just lock this. I don't know why I didn't do that sooner.
On principle.
Well, because they usually have a Purify, but... One, two, three, four. So we Oriana first, and then maybe save leader for the next turn. Is it better to save leader?
My sweet, sweet children.
Only because Blood Moon could hit one of these if I bleed them, and this won't. Because this is dying anyway. Like, he's got Imler's Wrath. Well, he's going to Imler's Wrath Regis, maybe. Ah, see, leadering this cost me a point. Plus, you know, the 3 points that this doesn't get. This Pallor's useless now. I probably should have mulliganed it. Now, like, clicking that was like 2 points here, but -1 here. So it's like, this was a 1 point Ikimara we got. This is an 8 provision card. This is a 13 provision build around card. It requires everything else.
I know you're in trouble. I can help.
And he's going to Imler's Wrath it anyway. What did he do to this? Nothing. Just Frost. So yeah. Leadering there was a mistake. Here comes... Yep. But like, even 3 more points wouldn't have made a difference. Like I said, it's a bad matchup.